Good morning. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. In today's update, there's hope for a bipartisan deal as President Biden pushes his COVID relief package in Congress. Last night, he met with 10 Republican senators. They now say there's no deal yet, but there are plans to keep at it.
I wouldn't say that we came together on a package tonight. No one expected that in a 2-hour meeting. But what we did agree to do is to follow up and talk further at the staff level and amongst ourselves and with the president and vice president.
Now, the proposed GOP plan offers $1,000 checks for low-income Americans rather than $1,400 checks proposed by the White House, and in general is a lot smaller than the $1.9 trillion bill pushed by the president. Late Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick will lie in honor today on Capitol Hill. Sicknick died on January 7th after sustaining injuries in the attack on the Capitol. Sicknick's casket will arrive tonight, and his former colleagues will be offered a viewing period. And Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is speaking out for the first time in real detail about her experience during the insurrection at the Capitol. Live on Instagram, AOC described the moments she says she thought she might die.
I felt that if this was the journey that my life was taking, that I felt that things were going to be okay. And that, you know, I had fulfilled my purpose.
The Congresswoman also revealed that she was sexually assaulted earlier in her life. She says this experience reminded her of that trauma. And 2 new storms are moving across the country as the Northeast is still dealing with that slow-moving nor'easter. Parts of New Jersey are under 2.5 feet of snow, and the snow is still coming down in some places along the coast. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z with more on that. Ginger, when will it end?
I know, that's what everybody wants to know. And Diane, since I saw you last, just after 9 a.m., I was in the city, close to Central Park, where there was almost 1.5 feet. Now, I only live 20-some miles north of New York City, and we've added almost a foot. So we are certainly close to those New Jersey numbers right up here, too. And there's more coming. So anybody watching right now that's saying, oh, I'm going to go shovel, well, you are going to have another 1 to 2 inches on top of it. But look at those numbers, what we already saw. 33.2 inches, the winter so far in Montague, New Jersey. Springtown, Pennsylvania coming in at more than 31 inches. Fishkill, New York got 25, so more than 2 feet for a lot of folks. This is a big one. I mean, it is the biggest in 5 years for New York City. It could end up being in the top 10 pretty easily, so the winter storm warnings are still on. They're down through Appalachia if you're in Western Virginia, Maryland even picking up some of that snow shower action this morning. Now it's going to move into New England by tonight, and by tomorrow we can finally say we're through with the snow showers and the leftover wind gusts, but only for a day or two because we've got new storms to talk about, Diane.
That's right. And Ginger, in the meantime, I know you and your husband are going to have a lot of shoveling to do, but I know the boys and the dogs are enjoying the storm at least. But as you said, we have more on the way. So what do we know about this new storms that you're tracking?
Right. So the next couple of storms, it's really hard to have a repeat of this. So don't look for that because we had 2 to 3.5 inches per hour. But you will see that new storm that's been, attacking the Bay Area with rain and parts of the Sierra with 1 to 2 feet of snow make its way across. So Thursday night, Chicago, who just got their biggest snow in a couple of years, they're going to get it. Then Friday, it'll quickly move through the Northeast. It's that second storm that's more of a Super Bowl Sunday night type of storm that could impact the folks in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania that just got hit with this one. And behind all of this, and here's the really important part, when you have a lot of fresh snow on the ground and then you bring in some Siberian air, you're going to feel like nearly 50 below in Minneapolis, 36 below. This is Sunday morning. It'll feel like 40 below in Chicago. Coldest air by far this season for most folks. And this is what we'll be locked into. So yes, I realized as I came home that I had to walk down the main street to get to home. That's how little plowing has been done so far, just to give you an idea, Diane.
All right. Well, at least you get to stay home now, hopefully at least for a little while. Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z, hope you and the fam enjoy it. Thank you. And we are taking a closer look this morning at the impact the pandemic is having on special needs students in the U.S. The CDC says in-person learning is possible with the right safety precautions, and many parents are pushing to get their kids back into the classroom. But families of students with disabilities say they are facing a unique uphill battle, and their kids are being left behind. When her St. Louis suburb first closed schools, Ashley Young saw it as an opportunity.
You know, you have these kind of grandiose ideas of this homeschool scenario that you're going to do.
But Ashley soon noticed her 6-year-old son, Miles, was slipping.
Can you say hi really quick? Hi. The kids would challenge him. They say if you don't use it, you lose it. We're like, great, okay, he knows all his colors. And then all of a sudden, 2 months later, he doesn't remember his colors anymore.
She says outside the classroom, Miles doesn't get the repetition he needs. Some lessons from his Individualized Education Program, or IEP, he can't receive at all. Even classes that otherwise work well on Zoom don't work well for Miles.
It was just too much to hear multiple people talking at a time, or sometimes just the way that the volume comes across on a Zoom.
During a recent Zoom class, things start out fine. Then Miles has trouble with the iPad. When Ashley comes to help, he's not happy.
Get out.
But once Ashley leaves, Miles makes a break for it.
Not Zoom. Stop. No.
And as soon as Ashley turns her back again, Miles is out. This is 6 minutes into class.
Were there moments that stuck out to you where you thought this just isn't working?
A kind of a turning point for me was I didn't necessarily like the mom that I was becoming, and it was just really overwhelming for both of us.
So Ashley resorted to hiring a private specialist to work with Miles in person, part-time.
I don't feel like he was getting, I don't want to say any education, but it's true. I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't feel like he learns anything from Zooms online.
It's a sentiment we're hearing from special needs families all across the country, like the Azeltine family of Charlotte, North Carolina. 6-year-old Connor is partially deaf and too young to read closed captions on Zoom.
He relies pretty much on myself or my husband sitting with him. Both my husband and I work. And no one's coming to us and saying, hey, we're going to pay your bills.
Courtney says to learn through a screen, Connor must first learn to read, a catch-22 since he's learning that virtually.
See the other kids his age reading paragraphs, reading sentences, or they can at least sound out words. And he can't do any of that. And it's heartbreaking.
She says the hardest part is that Connor is now old enough to realize he's falling behind.
The teacher put the answers up on the screen for them to all check themselves, and he didn't get a single one right. And he looked at me and put his head on my shoulder and started to cry.
Over in Pueblo West, Colorado, Kevin Blunt says his son Makai is supposed to receive regular speech therapy to help with his nonverbal autism. But since it can't be done via Zoom, Makai hasn't had speech therapy in almost a year.
We've even asked, are we able to sign a waiver and get specialists like speech therapy to come to the house? No, we can't do any of that at this time.
The family says the school also refused to loan them the sensory items normally used to help Makai learn.
Basically, putting Makai in front of a screen, it's useless. It really is.
You know, we've heard for years, no child left behind, no child left behind. But we really feel like the kids with an IEP or special needs are specifically being left behind.
Jennifer Manning, Director of Special Education for the Neighborhood Charter Schools in New York City, says parents are facing an impossible task.
We always say that just because you have a student with special needs as your child does not make you an expert on how to teach a kid with special needs.
At the end of the month, she hopes to welcome her special needs students back to the classroom, where they can attend virtual classes with the added help of in-person professionals. But she says that's not as easy as it sounds.
We have a building in which because of code, we can't open our windows. And so all of these precautions that are told to be put in place in order to make a building more safe are really, really complicated.
In the meantime, she says her school is working to make online learning as fruitful as possible.
If I'm a visual learner, I'm always going to have that visual piece to go back to. If I'm an audio learner, I'm always going to have something to click on so something can be read aloud to me. So we've sent home weighted vests, and we've sent home special seats and special sensory tools that we would have in the building so that kids and families have access to those tools at home. We know that this is not our ideal situation, but what can we do to make it better?
It's the kind of support the Blunts and the Azeltines say they're not receiving from their respective schools, but they intend to keep fighting.
I'll scream and I'll fight and I'll yell and I'll do whatever I have to do for someone to listen, because it's critical. It truly is critical.
Now, since we did those interviews, Mekhi Blunt is back in school for now. His school says they will monitor COVID-19 cases day by day. As for virtual learning for special needs students, the school says, quote, specialists and therapists continued to meet with those students and their parents virtually and provided as close to the same services possible as required on the student IEP plans. Now, an administrator for Connor Azeltine's school tells us we have followed appropriate procedures and made solid educational decisions in the midst of the most disruptive event I have experienced as an educator. We have worked and will continue to work in good faith with the Azeltines to make appropriate educational decisions for Connor. And as for Miles Young, Ashley says he has been welcome back in school for a while now, but because he has a heart condition, his doctors have deemed him too high risk. So both he and his sister Lucia will have to stay home for the foreseeable future. And now for more on the challenges that families with special education students are facing during this pandemic, let's bring in the Council of Administrators of Special Education, Representative Phyllis Wolfram. Phyllis, good morning. Thanks so much for being here. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges for special education students during this pandemic that most people probably don't realize?
Well, good morning, Diane. And first, thanks for having me on. Listening to the stories, it just brings home. I know that all of our teachers want to be back in school. That is just normal. I mean, we want normal again. I don't know that that will ever happen, and we'll be looking for the new normal. But many of the challenges, as your parents have said, is first and foremost keeping students safe, especially those students with the most significant disabilities, as well as the challenges of meeting the needs of those students who have what we refer to as a low incidence disability. For example, students who are deaf and students who are blind. I can understand the one parent who said closed captioning for her child who is deaf, but if they're young enough and they're still learning to read, that's not necessarily going to meet their needs. So we have to continue to communicate so very effectively with our parents to meet students where they are at this really, we say the word, but I don't know that I have found another word to replace unprecedented times in education as a whole, but specifically in special education, it is hard.
And it's important to realize that teachers and administrators are no doubt in a really tough spot here, too. I don't think anyone believes that schools are just disregarding any of their students, but are there any tips for how they can form the best plans for their special education students?
I think that, when we're working with families and, the implementation of the law varies so broadly from state to state and even school district to school district. Funding hasn't always been available in some of those areas as it has been in others. But I think to really go as far as you can to meet those students' needs. There has been this hesitation to send sometimes special equipment home. Send special equipment home. Let the kids have it. We can replace it. We need those kiddos to continue as much of a normal process as possible. And we know that parents struggle with that. And if they don't have the tools that a student might typically have when we're in school, they're not going to engage as much. So I think that continuing to have that individual communication with parents, checking in with them regularly, seeing where they are. There have been some instances where parents have said, I just can't do this. I can't do these services. We have encouraged educators to continue to make those contacts for when parents are ready and to go above and beyond what you might even typically do to provide those services to negate some of the losses or the regression that we might see.
And what about parents? If your child has a hard time learning virtually but has no other choice, what can you do?
Well, I think that, making sure that you're in contact with the teachers. I have heard many, many stories from special educators that they have engaged more readily and more effectively with parents, that they have moved into the virtual side. Parents who are working or parents who are at home are much more engaged in that process. So I would really encourage parents to communicate. I heard a commencement speaker say once, listen as fiercely as you want to be heard. And I would give that advice to all educators to really listen to what the parents are saying, and same to the parents as well, to really listen so that we're communicating effectively with with the educators and with the team that's making those decisions. For parents to really be in touch with those related service providers, with their occupational therapists, their physical therapists, if they're seeing counselors on the school setting, school psychologists, the speech language pathologists, to make contact. They have a toolkit full of tools, and parents need to ask for those. Ask for that assistance. What can I do when this happens? What do I do when that happens? So that they're as equipped as they can be. Nothing's perfect right now. But again, to continue that dialogue. I think to also tell some of the successes, some of the things that they have learned about their children since they have spent more time with them. I know that they see them in a different light. They see it's very difficult engaging just with a camera and a computer screen. And sometimes that's very difficult for especially students with attention problems, but to really keep the communication open for all of the educators with all of our parents.
And Education Week's Research Center found that there's a nationwide shortage of special education teachers. The number of special education teachers nationally has dropped by more than 17% over the past decade. How has that impacted then trying to educate these students in a pandemic?
It has significantly impacted. Several of my colleagues across the nation, when we were beginning to come back face-to-face or attempting to come back face-to-face, many of the teachers have made decisions to retire early or to maybe due to some other underlying medical conditions have been unable to come back. That has created even more of a shortage for local school districts across the country. And we don't want to replace with non-certified. However, that's what we're having to do in some situations. And in some situations, there aren't even those substitutes to come into those classrooms. So educators are faced now with another issue that they're having to overcome.
So Phyllis, is there any bright spot here? What do you hope to see happen moving forward? What can we learn from this?
You know, I think we can learn a lot. I think we know there are some students, I have heard some success stories, and I know that they're not overwhelming and it is not the majority, but we have learned that some students have made progress during this time. They may not be those students with the most significant disabilities, but with more mild disabilities, those with social anxiety, with some more emotional issues. And some of those students have really flourished in a different environment. I think we have to really take a look at offering services differently, more individually than we ever have for students with disabilities as we move forward. I think we might not ever be totally out of the hybrid type situation. And I think as educators, sometimes we get stuck in a little box, especially in special education, where we're functioning under this federal law with lots of compliance requirements. It can be very complex for educators. But I think if we communicate effectively, think outside the box, the sky's the limit on what we can really provide. We continue to advocate for more funding as well, and we want our parents to join us in that advocacy to fund special education as promised when it was first passed and enacted with Public Law 94-142.
All right. Phyllis Wolfram from the Council of Administrators of Special Education. Phyllis, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
And that does it for this ABC News Live update. I'm Diane Macedo. Our thank you to all those families who shared their story with us and to the many more out there who are struggling right now. Remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. I'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern with Terry Moran for The Breakdown.
I think it would be irresponsible of me as we go through World Pride Month not to speak of the events at the Stonewall Inn in June of 1969. Well, I'm certainly not going to stand up here and pretend to be an expert on what happened at Stonewall. I do know what happened should not have happened. The actions taken by the NYPD were wrong, plain and simple. The actions and the laws were discriminatory and oppressive, and for that, I apologize.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.